Attention humanoids, you've now entered the Working Person's Fantasy Football Podcast.
All right.
Let's get this show going, man.
Hurry up! Damn, I gotta go pee. Get that guy on the bus. I gotta go pee so bad right now.
There. How you gonna fart on the heater, bro? That's nasty. You cooking farts over there, man.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Working Person's Fantasy Football Podcast. I have a very special episode for you today, and I have a great guest. I'm so excited to finally have this particular individual on my podcast. I'm like shaking so much because I'm really happy to have him on. And so on this episode, I am joined by none other than Justin Hopkins, owner and writer at scoopduck.com. Justin covers anything and everything related to the University of Oregon football program. I'd like to give a big special welcome and thank you to Justin for joining me on the show. Welcome on, Justin.
Absolutely. Love to be on and love to support you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Justin, today. And I had supplied you with some questions ahead of time. And so first of all, I want to jump right on in. And can you tell the listeners how you became a sports writer and why?
Really for me in the particular market, that I'm doing, I did. It's really unconventional. I'm not a writer. I didn't go to school. I didn't go to journalism school. I didn't do any of that. Ultimately, I was just kind of a mega fan, if you will, like most other people that start out in this, but. Was just following recruiting and doing some of those other things. And first thing I started doing was I started contributing basically $10 an article, go talk to recruits and write it up and submit it. So obviously I wasn't doing it for the money because $10 an article, doesn't pay the bills. I was doing it for fun, but just through hard work, I was able to just kind of continue on and next thing you know, here I own my own site. So it's just kind of a crazy story.
That's awesome. And I know that for me personally, I'm a follower on your site. I read your articles and, I'm an active listener and viewer on Twitter. So, follow your everything that you got going on. My next question that I have for you is that what made you choose to cover the University of Oregon specifically and not any other school?
I imagine, it's several reasons, but one would be logistics. Obviously, I'm close to the university, so getting there for football games or basketball games or, any of the events is manageable for me. Secondly, I grew up, watching the University of Oregon, living here, under Bellotti, all those guys, Rich Brooks, been able to see Oregon football kind of grow into what it is today. So, being familiar with the program's a big thing. I don't care what sports writer you talk to, whether it's NFL or NBA or college. Most of those guys that are covering that school are fans of that school. Some might just do a better job of kind of keeping their fanhood, to the side or at least in check, which I believe I do a decent job of. But at the end of the day, if any of those guys said, "Hey, I didn't grow up, cheering for this school," they're 9 out of 10 times they're probably full of it. So, for me, it was just kind of all those things. And lastly, the reason is I developed really good relationships within the University of Oregon, the administration, the coaching staff, and just different people. So, once you get sources and you're able to get that information, that becomes a major part of what you do.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's taken you many years to develop those specific relationships with not only coaching staff, but recruits. Can you dive a little bit into how you develop a relationship with like a recruit? Are you just like cold calling them, or are you meeting them at specific events?
There's two ways. Obviously for me living in Oregon, there's not an abundance of recruits that Oregon or USC or Alabama are recruiting in a given year. Now, if I lived in Southern California, that would be different. So for me, actually, social media has changed the game so much in the last 2 years that a lot of what I do and a lot of what we do is reaching out to these young men through Twitter, maybe getting a phone number and wanting to call them. A lot of these kids just like to text or direct message through Twitter. And that's just kind of the way, the way the world's changed a little bit. I will say if you're able to meet a recruit in person, so at like an opening event or, at one of the bowl games or, if they're on campus visiting Oregon or another school, that really helps getting that face-to-face interpersonal relationship with them. That's a big part of what you will see. Some more of the successful guys out there have a really good face-to-face relationship with a lot of recruits. So being where I'm at in Oregon, a lot of what I do is done over Twitter, done over phone. But again, I was in Dallas a couple of weeks ago at the opening finals down there and had an opportunity to meet a lot of Oregon commits, Oregon targets, other guys. I've met Royce Freeman, who we're going to talk about later, before he signed on with Oregon. Marcus Mariota. I've been able to meet those guys and kind of meet them before they were the stars, if you will, at Oregon.
Okay, thanks. And real quick, you mentioned the opening. Now, many listeners of this podcast and across the nation may not know what the opening is. Would you mind giving just a brief explanation of what that is?
So yeah, each year the opening, which is in conjunction with Nike, they go around to about, I think it's down to 8 or 10 camps across the country, regional camps. And what they do is they'll see several hundred high school recruits at those camps at each location. And then what they do at the end is they invite the top 150 players, quarterbacks, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and then all the skill players. They invite them to one, like mega camp, if you will, called the opening finals. Usually it's hosted in Portland, Oregon on Nike's headquarters on campus there, but due to construction, it was moved to Dallas this year at the Star, the practice facility for the Cowboys. So that's ultimately what that is. So, those players that come through there, they're the best of the best. I mean, they're 150 of the best players, high school players in the country you're going to find. And ultimately, a lot of your future NFL stars, run through that event every year.
Yeah, and that's an amazing event. I know that it's a big thing here in Oregon, and they put out a lot of the information regarding the opening on TV and so on. And you hit on what we're going to be talking about today. And like I said, for the past 4 seasons, the University of Oregon football program, they've had a very special player on its roster. And as you just said, it's Royce Freeman. He attended Imperial High School in California, where he holds the San Diego record for rushing yards of 7,606. He has 111 touchdowns and 724 points scored. He was listed as the top running back in the nation for the 2014 recruiting class. At least that's the information that I found. Can you explain what the it factor was for Royce Freeman in high school that made the University of Oregon recruit him so heavily?
Well, at the time, Gary Campbell was the coach, the running back coach on staff at Oregon when Royce Freeman was coming through. And Oregon was looking for that bigger back, if you will, and Royce Freeman certainly fits that mold. I mean, he's 6'1", 6 foot. Right now I would wager he's probably around 225, and he was around 215 coming out of high school. He's just a very stoutly built young man. More important than that, and equally important, I guess, if you will, is the fact that Royce is a tremendous young man. I mean, he never got into trouble at Oregon, as everyone knows, but you could tell coming out of high school that he had his values. He's a good young man. You weren't going to have to worry about him getting in trouble at Oregon. So kind of all of those elements combined, Oregon was in the market for a bigger back. I'll be honest, Royce Freeman had really good grades, but he didn't have Stanford grades. And if he did, he probably would have gone to Stanford ahead of Oregon. That's about the only other school he really liked. But he had the national offers. He had USC, Florida. Everybody offered him. Ultimately, Oregon did a good job recruiting him. Coach Campbell did. And, once again, he's a total package. He's a very good person, a very good individual, and obviously he's a talented football player.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody can coach and recruit high school running backs, it was Coach Campbell. I mean, that guy was like the running back whisperer. I mean, he was just awesome and amazing. Okay, moving forward, in one of your rankings for the 2014 college football recruiting class, you listed Freeman as the 20th best player nationally, ahead of players like Joe Mixon, Juju Smith-Schuster, Dalvin Cook, Deshaun Watson, and Nick Chubb. Obviously, Smith-Schuster's in the NFL along with Dalvin Cook, Deshaun Watson, and Joe Mixon. They've been in the National Football League for at least a year now. So, can you explain a little bit about that? Reflecting back on those rankings, would you have ranked Freeman higher, lower, or somewhere in between, or in the same spot?
It's tough. Rankings are an imperfect science. You're never going to be 100%. I think the goal, if fans could kind of understand this, I think the goal is to try and, if you will, maybe be within 80% accuracy. So what that means is, okay, Royce Freeman, if he had been ranked at number, 350 overall, clearly we would have missed the mark. As it was, being ranked around number 20 overall, I think you can stomach that. I mean, he's in good company. Those are all great players, but at least Royce Freeman's kind of where he belongs. I think with the way that the NFL has, to a point, devalued running backs, running backs typically aren't going to go in the first round anymore. There are, of course, exclusions to that, but overall, NFL GMs aren't paying a premium for running backs, if you will. They're paying a premium for offensive linemen and quarterbacks. So Deshaun Watson, I think he's going to have a terrific year this year. Dalvin Cook looks like he's the man there in Minnesota, going to have a big year. Joe Mixon, he's on the verge of breaking out, but we'll see what Royce Freeman can do in Denver. I think he landed in a pretty sweet situation there. And looking back, I'd say, Royce Freeman was ranked in a pretty good spot. I guess you could argue you could push him down a little bit, but, overall, it's not an egregious error by any means.
Yeah, I think that the likes of who he was in a class with is just phenomenal. Just the raw talent alone in that particular class is pretty amazing. So let's focus more a little bit on the running backs with Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, and Nick Chubb. What separates Freeman from the likes of those players?
In terms of Joe Mixon, that's an easy one. They don't really compare because they're a different type of running back. Mixon's going to be that big play guy. Doesn't mean he can't carry the rock, but he's not going to be a pounder between the tackles sort of a guy. In terms of Dalvin Cook, he's a little bit smaller in stature, but he's a great running back as well. I think what you get from Royce Freeman versus those other three is you do kind of get that total package. Royce Freeman's not going to run away from a cornerback on a dead sprint. He's not going to do that. But on the same token, he's, in that 6 foot, 225, 230 pound range, which most of those other guys are not. So if you want him to run between the tackles, he can do that. If you want him to catch the ball out of the backfield, he can do that. He showcased that at Oregon. I know that was kind of one of his less talked about talents. But in terms of basically kind of having that, the total package, if you will, nothing against those other guys because I have covered Joe Mixon pretty extensively. Haven't been quite as familiar with Nick Chubb, although I know he had a good career down there at Georgia. Dalvin Cook was another good one in college, but man, I really think when you get Royce Freeman, you get that total package, a guy that can catch, can run between the tackles, and a guy that can pick up, he can pick up some big chunks of yards because he has enough speed to gain those yards.
Yeah, and I think if looking back on it, I was watching some video the other day on YouTube, and I was rewatching a game from his freshman year when Marcus Mariota was behind center, and I think they were in Arizona playing the University of Arizona. And to me, Roy, based upon what you're talking about, I feel like that game alone was really what Royce Freeman was kind of all about. I felt like when he was running the ball, he was hitting the holes. He was, pushing up against, those players, running the ball down the field. I feel like he's got a lot of power. I mean, do you think that that game was a real symbol of what was to come for Royce Freeman?
I think when Royce Freeman's 100% healthy, which he isn't always 100%, or he wasn't always 100% healthy at Oregon. I think a lot of times he was always nursing through something. But when Royce Freeman's 100% healthy and the offensive line, is working for him, I think you can see what Royce Freeman's capable of. If you're expecting him to go out there and run laterally side to side and just wait for lanes to open up. That's not his running style. If he can get that crease, if he's healthy, if he can hit the hole, he's going to be able to get you 3, 4, 5 yards at a time consistently. And then, of course, mix in some of those explosion plays, which he, did really well at Oregon. And like you said, I think we saw games. There were certain games with Royce Freeman that just you could see he was on his game. He was healthy. The line was blocking. Everything was working. And you could see just how special of a running back he was or is.
Yeah. And I think Pete Martini, if I'm spelling his name correct, saying his last name correctly, a writer for the Statesman Journal. I know in 2017 he wrote an article titled Oregon Duck Football, Who Are the Best Players in Program History? And he listed his top 5 running backs of all time as number 5 being Derek Lovell, number 4 Jonathan Stewart, 3 Royce Freeman, 2 Kenyon Barner, 1 LaMichael James. And, Royce Freeman finished his career at Oregon as the all-time leading rusher with 5,621 yards and career leader in touchdowns with 60. Why do you think maybe Pete listed Freeman behind the likes of Barner and James in that particular order?
Obviously not talking to Pete Martini. I don't know his reasoning. For me to look at it, I don't know if he was just looking, from a pure talent standpoint or what they were able to accomplish with what they had around them while they were at Oregon. In my mind, as I look at his list, I really don't have much problem putting LaMichael James at number 1. He had some terrific games. Obviously benefited from being in the Chip Kelly scheme there in that offense. I loved what Kenyon Barner did his senior year. Obviously, he'd go down to L.A. and, watching him torch USC was pretty amazing. I just don't think that I can put him ahead of Royce Freeman on my own list. It would really be a 1A and a 1B for me in terms of LaMichael James and Royce Freeman. I'm not even sure that I could put Kenyon Barner ahead of Jonathan Stewart. And I would assume that most older Duck fans would agree with me on that. I mean, obviously those 3, it might even be a 1A, 1B, and 1C. But, in terms of me, that's the only thing I could see is putting Kenyon Barner at 2. This almost looks like a most recent success list, followed by Jonathan Stewart and Derek Lovell. But, man, it just serves as a reminder how many great running backs the University of Oregon has put out in the last 20, 25 years. I mean, there's just been some tremendous backs coming out of there. And I got to think, just because it's fresh in our minds, I got to think what Royce Freeman did in his career. He's up there. I mean, him and LaMichael James and Jay Stu, I mean, those 3 are pretty special talents there in my mind.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that all these gentlemen on this list are really special. Personally, I think a little bit like, I think LaMichael James, he did have the elbow injury when he was at college, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so I think that had he, the Royce Freeman, had he not been injured, I think that those numbers would have been much higher. And I think that, like you said, being under the Chip Kelly system would have continued to benefit both players. I know Royce Freeman wasn't necessarily under the Chip Kelly system, but he was still with some of the same individuals that were on the Chip Kelly staff when he played there. So, moving into, Royce Freeman's draft and combine profile on NFL.com, I mean, they describe his weaknesses as not always playing to his size, having too much wear on the tires, running a lot at Oregon, and saying that you said that he kind of lacked that explosive getaway speed to pull away from tackles. And they also said he's too willing to take contact rather than doling it out. What's your take on this? Does he have too many miles on him? Does he lack the explosive speed to break tackles and pull away? And my personal opinion, just I always thought Royce is like a tank. I always called him Royce the Tank Freeman. I thought that he just had great athleticism. He had great size, and I personally think he could hit another player and then continue going. But I want to hear what your take is on this.
I think a number of factors are in play here. I'll address the first one, not always playing to his size. I could see that. I think fans were even critical of that at times where, Royce maybe just didn't seem to have the power that you would expect from somebody that's 225, 230 pounds. I mean, if you go stand next to Royce in person, he is a tank. Just like, I mean, he is a specimen. But along with that, what I will say is that, you know, Oregon previously, as we know, under Chip Kelly, under Mark Helfrich, they didn't talk or disclose about injuries. And I think a lot of those times, I think Royce played through a lot of games that he probably didn't need to per se, all the time, trying to help the team. So he was injured quite a bit, and maybe it wasn't enough to keep him out of the game. But as well as I do, if you're not 100%, you're not 100%. So I can see the criticisms there, and I can't say they're not completely warranted. But at the same time, I think there might be a little bit of injury and some other things going on there. Having too much wear on the tires, I mean, that is something that running backs are, constantly having to monitor. It's like a pitch count for a pitcher in baseball. Those guys are only going to have so many carries, so many hits on their bodies, and it's such a violent game that, I do understand that. But I think it's really unfair to say that a rookie coming into the NFL has too much wear on his tires. I mean, there's no way that you can tell me that Royce Freeman's, had too many carries over a 4-year collegiate career. When the Bo Jacksons and the Marcus Allens of the world used to do it every year. So I think he'll be fine there, but obviously at some point in the NFL, yeah, he'll have too many, too much wear on the tires. I think obviously Jace Dew is an example. He's probably getting quite a bit of wear on his tires, but he's also had a terrific career. Lacks explosive getaway speed to pull away from tackles. I would say that's an area that he can work on, but along with that, speed was not something that Oregon really worked on under Willie Taggart. In fact, in my opinion, Royce Freeman got slower when Willie Taggart showed up and brought his strength staff. And I'm not going to sit here and pick on that and pigeonhole that, but if you're not training these elite athletes for speed, obviously they're not going to get faster. So I do think that probably hurt Royce Freeman's draft stock a little bit. I think that the new strength staff that Oregon has in place would have helped him had he been able to work with them longer. And I think obviously the Denver Broncos training staff, I think they'll be able to get him up to speed. So,
I agree with that.
I kind of discredit that one a little bit because I do think that had a little bit with what was going on here at Oregon. And last thing, too willing to take on contact rather than doling it out. Again, if you're hurt and you go in and your elbows hurt or your arms hurt or your shoulders hurt or something that, to that degree, and you want to carry the ball 20 or 25 times, I think I likened it to Sean Alexander of the Seahawks. He had a pretty good career, but you could tell at the end he would shy away from contact or he would run out of bounds. In my mind, there is a point where, yes, you do need to dish out for those tough yards, and there's a time where you can go ahead and avoid that hit because there's nothing to be gained. So I think that's just smart football. I think Royce Freeman's a smart player. I don't see that being as a problem for him in the NFL.
Yeah, and back to your point about the strength and conditioning and being a little slower. I mean, I noticed that myself a little bit under the Willie Taggart era. And I think with a little bit of time with his new program that he's under with the Denver Broncos and getting in with them, I think that'll be very helpful. I think that you'll probably see an uptick in his speed this upcoming year. So I know you highlighted a little bit on this earlier, but Freeman was taken in the 3rd round of the 2018 NFL draft by the Denver Broncos. In your opinion, was he drafted high, low, or just right?
I think just right. Maybe just a touch low. I could see an argument for maybe like a lower 2nd round pick. Later in the 2nd round, if you will, to clarify that. But I think he was right in the sweet spot, and I think more importantly, he found a really good home. He found a good opportunity. I mean, the Denver Broncos, like Oregon, have turned out some terrific NFL running backs. They seem to always be committed to running the football, and they don't really have a lot of guys on the roster. Obviously, right now it seems like it's Royce Freeman or Devontae Booker kind of vying for that starting job. Clearly, they don't have a ton of faith in Booker because they went and drafted Royce Freeman, fairly high in the draft. So I think he's going to have every opportunity to, to compete for that starting spot. But again, just kind of where he was drafted overall, I think he found a good home. Again, late in the second round, somewhere in the third round, I think that's a fair spot to take him. So I think the Broncos got some value.
Yeah, I think they got some great value where they selected him, and you actually answered my next question that I had about where if he was going to be maybe potentially starting running back this year, so on. But since you answered that question, let me just throw this little curve at you. Do you think that Royce would have potentially benefited even more going to a different club like maybe the New England Patriots? How when they got LeGarrette Blount, how it seemed like he was able to turn a corner and be a much more powerful back, former Oregon Duck, being in New England, being in under that Bill Belichick system. Do you think he could have maybe benefited a little bit more, or could benefit a little bit more if he had gone to like the likes of New England or maybe like a Pittsburgh or somewhere else?
Well, obviously, every player wants to go to the NFL and win a championship. I know, I can't imagine that there's any player out there that doesn't have those aspirations. So if you say, hey, maybe would he have benefited being on the Eagles or the Patriots or, one of those title contenders? Not that the Broncos won't be, but, I think from that perspective of being more successful and wins losses as a team, obviously that would probably be better. But really, I think everybody, you got to find that right situation. And I do believe that Royce Freeman can be an every down back. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run between the tackles. He can bounce it outside and still pick up yards if you need to. He's 225, 230 pounds, so he's not going to take 5 or 6 hits and get hurt, hopefully. So I think he landed in a good situation there. I think what we need to do at this point is we know what Royce Freeman can do in college or what he did in college in the schemes he was in. Obviously, the NFL schemes are so much different. It's ultimately going to be figuring out how to best utilize them. I mean, we see it with quarterbacks where they've got to find the right type of offense to really utilize their talents. Well, it's the same for running backs because there's, trap zone schemes and there's so many different ways that these guys are running the football. It's going to be up to seeing how, if Denver really gets the full potential out of him, or if, he plays a year or two there and who knows, he bounces around to the next stop and finds better success there. I still think, knowing the type of young man he is, that he's a great person and a hard worker. I think Royce Freeman is going to find some form of success. And again, he's obviously pushing Devontae Booker for that starting spot now, just a few weeks into camp. So I've got to believe that that's going to continue through the season as he gets bigger, stronger, faster, and learns the offense and gets more comfortable with the NFL speed. You got to feel good about him at least getting, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 touches a game potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my prediction is that I think it's only a matter of a couple games, and it may be even the preseason that decides this, that Royce Freeman will be the starting running back there in Denver. I think that's why they drafted him. I think that's, what they were looking at is who they had, and I just don't think that they had the running back that fits their system, and I honestly think that they actually drafted the running back that will fit their system moving forward. And now having a new quarterback there in Denver and Casey Keenum, I think is going to be helpful for him. You were able to see what Keenum did with Dalvin Cook in Minnesota. So it'll be interesting this season to see what Keenum can do with Royce Freeman in the backfield. And while we're talking quarterbacks, let's talk about another Oregon great, Heisman Trophy winner, Marcus Mariota, the Tennessee Titans. How do you think he's transitioned into the NFL?
It just hasn't been an easy road for Marcus. Obviously, the Titans have not had success making a coaching change. If I recall correctly, and I just going off memory, I think Marcus has had, this will be his third offensive coordinator already in the NFL. And again, as I talked about Royce Freeman a minute ago, you've got to find the right scheme to fit these guys' talents, maximize their potential, and it's incredibly important to do at the quarterback position. So, I think he's had mixed success in the NFL right now, and it's not completely his doing. The offensive line hasn't been terrific. He really doesn't have very many great options at receiver, although they seem to have made improvements there for this upcoming year. So I, I'd say the jury's still out on Marcus Mariota. Yeah, it hasn't been pretty so far, but again, if you paid really close attention to what's going on, he's had to learn a couple new offenses. He's had to adjust to the NFL game, which is completely different than what he was doing under Chip Kelly and Mark Helfrich. Hasn't had the offensive line support. They finally just got him some running backs last year. Although they were good, they weren't great. So there's a lot of different factors going in, but I do see, I have read, I do believe everything that points this year is Marcus should see a step forward under the new coaching staff, and I do believe they're going to better utilize him. It'll probably take a little bit of time to get used to that offense they're going to run down there, but I think once they kind of get that in place, they have better receivers now. They have made a little bit of improvements to the line, and he has a decent run game. Now that he's got some support, I think that Marcus Mariota could begin to blossom at the NFL level.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like over the last, several years since he entered the NFL, I don't feel like Tennessee's really utilized his talents to the fullest extent like we saw on display in Oregon. I also do feel like Marcus kind of got screwed a little bit because I felt like he should have been the overall number one pick. I mean, you got Jameis Winston, he's been in some trouble himself, with the latest now 3-game suspension from the Uber incident. You got Marcus, who we've both been privy to seeing over the years. You've been privy to being able to have that discussion with him, communication. I mean, you've got a great kid. I mean, this guy is like well-rounded to me. Really loves being around people, loves the fans, and I think it, personally, in my opinion, he should have been the consensus overall number one pick in the draft when he came out. So I'd like to know what your prediction for Marcus is this year. Do you think that he's going to get a lot more rushing yards? Is he going to be throwing more touchdowns? What's your prediction alone this year for Marcus?
Here's the deal. They don't have anyone behind him, so the more that you run him, obviously you're just setting yourself up for danger there. So I got to believe they're going to do their best to protect him and probably limit his rushes, unless it's wide open. Obviously, we'll see him slide before contact. So in terms of that, I don't think there will be a lot of changes, but I do believe that if they can really just pare down the offense and say, hey, Marcus, we're going to ask you to really just kind of simplify. It's going to be a pretty simple route tree. Just make his reads easier. Simple short yard passing, slants and things that get the ball out of his hand, quicker. It seemed like before it was really boom or bust. It was either, short or very deep, not a lot of intermediate at Tennessee. So I think if they can really put those things into play, I don't have I don't know. I think his passing yards and his passing touchdowns will go up this year. I don't believe that we'll see a major increase in his rushing yards or rushing touchdowns. And if Tennessee's smart, they won't do that as well. So, again, it's going to be based on their success, but he has better options at receiver this year than he's ever had in Tennessee, in my opinion. He's got a decent run game. He's got a decent offensive line. So I do believe that his passing numbers will probably go up. We do know that he can protect the football. So in terms of him throwing interceptions and things like that, Marcus is pretty careful with the ball. If they really limit the offense to his strengths, I think he can have a very strong year.
Yeah, I think, he will have a stronger year this year. He's got his better receiving. He's definitely got a really good running back core behind him, and Dion Lewis, who they just picked up from the Patriots this past season. And they got Derrick Henry, who they drafted a few years back. So I really think that Marcus is going to have that supporting role, because then as long as he has the running that we saw he had in Oregon, if he has that running game, he has that decent offensive line with some good receivers, he's definitely going to be able to be more effective, to your point. And I think he's going to have maybe a breakout season this year, in my opinion. So with all this said, I really want to say thank you, Justin, for taking time out of your schedule. I know that you're taking away from your time from your site, from talking with recruits and getting us, the avid reader on your site or on your Twitter feed, and looking at what information that you're able to provide, which is of high quality. But for my listeners and the listeners that are out there, if you could take a couple minutes and maybe talk a little bit about yourself and about your site and anything else that you want to, talk about as it relates to Scoop Duck and what you do for the University of Oregon program, I'd like to give you some time to do that right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a fantasy football generated podcast, but if you're, if you love college athletics or specifically the Oregon Ducks, you can find me on scoopduck.com. That's my site. I own it. I'm not part of a network. I am subscription based, so the money that does come in goes to me. It doesn't go to a network and then filters a little bit to me. If you're somebody that's active on Twitter, you can follow me at jhopkinssd. And that's where I'm at on Twitter as well. I have free content that you're able to read without putting any credit card information in. Some of the inside scoop that the people follow me for, injury reports or the latest on recruiting, that is subscription based. So anyways, you could sign up for free and take a look at some of the free content there. And, once again, scoopduck.com or at jhopkinssd on Twitter. That's where I'm at, and love doing these types of things. And hopefully we'll have a Scoop Duck podcast coming up soon as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome, and I would definitely be an avid listener of that podcast. And just for the listeners, I want to reiterate how well Justin does as far as when it comes to his website and him putting out great content and information. And I am a subscriber. I'll be biased. I'm a subscriber of Scoop Duck, which is SCOOPDUCK.com. That's SCOOPDUCK.com. Just so that way everybody's aware of that and they can go to your site. I'll also include a link on my Twitter feed for those of you, and on my Facebook account I'll also include that, so that way the listeners can go to your feed and see what you have to offer. But Justin, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule today to come on the show. I really appreciate your insight, the knowledge that you're able to share with our listeners regarding Royce Freeman, the Oregon football program, and Marcus Mariota. So thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure.
Okay, folks. Well, that'll do it for this episode. Justin, again, thank you. And that's all we have for today. So for now, take care and have a great day. Peace out.